Hey everybody, I hope y'all are doing great. Now I can't see myself talking about the Temptations and not talk about the very talented, wonderful, humble Eddie Kendricks. Eddie Kendricks was born Edward James Kendrick in Union Springs, Alabama on December 17th, 1939. He had one sister, Patricia, and three brothers, Charles, Robert, and Clarence. His family moved to the Ensley neighborhood of Birmingham. He later met his best friend Paul Williams, and they began to sing in their church choir together. Eddie and Paul Williams had a friendship that I truly admire. Eddie was very loyal to Paul. I believe they had an amazing friendship. In 1955, Eddie, Paul, and friends Kel Osborne and Jerome Everett formed a doo-wop group called the Cavaliers, and they began to perform around Birmingham. The group moved to Cleveland, Ohio, on East 123rd and Kinsman in 1957. In Cleveland, they met Milton Jenkins, who became their manager, and soon moved with Jenkins to Detroit, Michigan, where the Cavaliers renamed themselves the Primes. The Primes were pretty successful in the Detroit area. Then later, a female spin-off group was created called the Primettes, who would later become the Supremes. In 1961, Osborne moved to California and the Primes broke up. Eddie and Paul Williams later got together with Elbridge Al Bryant, Otis Williams, and Melvin Blue Franklin of Otis Williams and the Distance. They later auditioned for Motown Records in March 1961, and they impressed Berry Gordy, who decided to sign the group to the Motown imprint Miracle. However, Berry Gordy found out there was another group that was called the Elgins, so the group renamed themselves to the Temptations. The Temptations began singing background for Mary Wells. For a while, they didn't have any hits. Then in 1964, the song The Way You Do the Things You Do took off, with brother Eddie Kendricks singing lead. It went to the Pop Top 20, then it went to number 1 on the Cashbox R&B charts chart. Temptations quickly became the most successful male vocal group of the 1960s. It is said that nobody could touch them. Nobody. They were just awesome. Eddie was technically first tenor in the group's harmony, but he often sang in the falsetto. Some of the songs Eddie sang lead on were Dream Come True, 1962, the group's first charting single, The Way You Do the Things You Do, I'll Be in Trouble, The Girl's All Right With Me, 1964, a popular B-side that Eddie co-wrote, Girl, Why You Gonna Make Me Blue, Why You Wanna Make Me Blue, Get Ready, Please Return Your Love to Me, and Just My Imagination in 1971. Now, let's talk about Eddie and fashion. He had exquisite taste. I'm sure y'all could see that too. You saw that. He knew how to dress. He designed a lot of the Temptations' outfits, including the popular purple suits they wore for a performance. He was their wardrobe manager. Eddie's daughter talked about how everything looked good on Eddie and how his hats became his signature. His ex-wife, Patricia, also talked about how much Eddie liked fashion. She said he chose the colors and how he wanted the clothes made. He was really talented. I saw an interview with Eddie and David in later years, and David was joking around, telling Eddie that he didn't like some of the clothes Eddie made them wear. In 1964, David Ruffin replaced Al Bryant in the Temptations, and the group became even bigger. David sang lead on the song My Girl in 1965. Then a few months later, Eddie sang lead on their third number 1 hit, Get Ready. It was a great combination to have David and Eddie singing lead. With all that success, Eddie's friends said he never lost sight of himself or where he came from. Darlene, the mother of Paul Kendricks, talked about how down-to-earth Eddie was, that he never talked about himself. He didn't put on no air or anything like that. His ex-wife, Patricia, said that the Temptations were on the road all the time, and Eddie A lot of the times he would hide or pretend to be sick so he wouldn't have to go on the road. Then eventually he accepted and he went. Eddie was a kind man from what I can see. She talked about how Eddie accidentally hit a squirrel and it died, and Eddie took it so hard. He buried the squirrel in the backyard. He said that the squirrel had a family to take care of. She said Eddie had a show that night and he wouldn't go. He didn't go to the show, y'all. She said he went to bed and stayed there 3 days. That's how much it affected him. What a kind heart he had. How many of us would do that? At some point, certain people started having issues with David Ruffin. There was a time when he said he wanted the name to change to David Ruffin and the Temptations. And when they started talking about letting David go, Eddie was the main person against it. He wanted David to stay. They mentioned that on the Unsung episode. Eddie's friend Prentice Anderson said on that Unsung episode that Eddie was always backing David because he believed that they didn't truly make it until they got David. But by 1968, David was gone out of the Temptations. Eddie started having problems with certain things going on, and the immediate problem was the declining health of his best friend, Paul Williams, who suffered from sickle cell disease, which is a very tough disease to deal with, y'all. I recently lost another family member who suffered from sickle cell, and it is very hard to deal with. Paul later turned to alcohol. Dennis Edwards said that Otis hired Richard Street to sing Paul's notes, and Eddie was very irritated about that. He didn't like that at all. This was said on the Unsung episode with Dennis Edwards being interviewed. This happening to Paul hurt Eddie deeply. Eddie and Paul were friends since they were kids, so I can imagine how terrible he felt. You know, aside from Eddie's wonderful singing voice, what I admired most about him was the great friend he was. Y'all, if you have just one or two loyal friends in your life, you're very lucky. Treat them right. They don't come along every day. So I watched the Unsung episode about Eddie Kendricks, and they interviewed his beautiful daughter and his ex-wife Patricia also. His daughter said that Eddie and Diana Ross dated back in the primes and the primette days, and some of you know that Berry Gordy and Diana was in a relationship at some point. They also had a child together. Eddie's daughter said that Eddie felt that was the reason Berry Gordy didn't give him a fair chance, allegedly. I also saw an interview with Eddie that he did with Urban Street. He said in the interview that he didn't really know Berry Gordy. He only met him about 3 times. He said what he does know is that Berry Gordy didn't particularly care for him. It was mentioned in the Unsung episode interview that it was believed that Diana Ross was in love with Eddie Kendricks. His ex-wife Patricia talked about how Diana showed up at one of their properties. She said she doesn't like to remember that time, that it wasn't pretty. One of the men who was on that Unsung episode said that while Eddie was married, Diana came to their property and was banging on the door and broke a glass, honey, allegedly. And this info got back to the head office, which wasn't good. I can understand why someone wouldn't want to lose Eddie, though. He was a fine man, and I believe he was a good man. So I can understand that loss. Eddie's last #1 song with the Temptations was Just My Imagination. That song took off, but Eddie walked away. After leaving the Temptations in 1970, Eddie stayed with Motown as a solo artist and went to #1 with his song Keep On Trucking. And after that, he had 8 top 10 songs with Motown, including 2 #1s, Shoeshine Boy and Boogie Down. He left Motown after 9 solo albums. He later signed with Arista Records, then Atlantic. He wasn't as successful with them, though. In the early 80s, they decided to do a Temptations reunion tour. To kick off the tour, Motown produced a Temptations reunion album featuring the 5 current members at the time, along with Eddie Kendricks and David Ruffin. They got Melvin Franklin's nephew, Rick James, to write, produce, and guest perform on the album's lead single, Standing on the Top. The tour started out good, but it didn't end well. Dennis Edwards said people started missing shows and people were getting high, including himself. He said everybody chipped in to make it not work. In 1983, Eddie released his final solo album, but the record didn't really take off. In 1985, Hall & Oates performed with Eddie and David Ruffin at the Apollo Theater, and an album recorded there reached number 20 on the charts. Eddie, David, and Dennis did a tour of their own, and they called themselves the original lead singers of The Temptations, which was a successful tour. It is said that Eddie was having issues with his voice. He wasn't hitting notes like he used to. And on the Unsung episode, Dennis Edwards said that Eddie smoked cigarettes. His daughter Aka said she didn't know he smoked. Midway during the tour, Eddie visited his doctor and found out he had a pin drop of cancer on his lungs, allegedly. Eddie didn't see quitting as an option. He continued with the tour. His friend Prentice Anderson said the more they toured, the sicker Eddie got. Then in June 1991, Eddie's friend David Ruffin died, and it was said that Eddie took it very hard because David was like a brother. They talked about this on the Unsung episode as well. Prentice said after David died, Eddie became sicker. He said Eddie went to the hospital and had a lung removed, and just weeks after his lung operation, Eddie and Dennis continued touring. This time it was in the Middle East. Tunis Wilson said Eddie didn't quit because he didn't want them to have to suffer. This is how selfless he was. He just kept on going, y'all. In 1992, Eddie returned to the Apollo one last time and performed. The place was packed. Tunis said he had a huge tank of oxygen there to help him to breathe. He was still trying to perform. He was still performing, even though he wasn't at his best. He would go get some oxygen and come back and sing. This man is the perfect definition of no excuses, y'all. He didn't give up. He kept on trucking. People in the crowd looked so happy to be there in his presence. I saw this video, with him performing there. That was his last public performance. Eddie Kendricks died on October 5th, 1992, at only 52 years old. Eddie Kendricks was given a park in Birmingham, which he so deserves. Eddie had 3 children, Paris Kendricks, Paul Kendricks, and daughter Aka. Eddie Kendricks is a man I will always, always, always admire. Rest in peace, Brother Eddie.